Okay, picking back where we left off, or at least I think so. Pretty sure. We're close. Those who knew the real fate of the U-2 remained silent, and those who did not went through their paces like automatons. The official spokesman of the State Department, Lincoln White, came out immediately after Khrushchev's remarks and repeated Glennon's story, and again claimed innocent action on the part of the disabled pilot on the same date. The U.S. ambassador in Moscow reported that he had picked up some cocktail party gossip in Moscow that implied that the American pilot had been captured and that he was in good health. The 1958 incident was being repeated almost to the line. The hopes began to rise that this mistake would be no worse than the last one. Then, on May 7th, Khrushchev moved in for the kill. Comrades, I must let you in on a secret. When I made my report, I deliberately refrained from mentioning that the pilot was alive and safe, and that we had the remnants of the plane. We did this deliberately because had we given out the whole story, the Americans would have thought up another version. He then went on to give the whole story in detail. However, he was stopped short of accusing Eisenhower of knowing that the flight had been ordered over the Soviet Union. It is entirely possible, in fact, it is most probable, the whole truth, that Eisenhower did not know that the U-2 had been dispatched on that fateful flight. Khrushchev offered him a way out when he said, I am prepared to grant that the president had no knowledge of a plane being dispatched to the Soviet Union and failing to return, but that should alert us still more. The Russian premier was ready to say, wait a minute, where am I? Shit. Khrushchev, okay, I am prepared to grant the president had no knowledge of the plane being dispatched to the Soviet Union and failing to return, but that should alert us still more. The Russian premier was ready to say, we are also so close to the summit and to peace. I am ready to accept that this was a cruel and terrible provocation made by others without the knowledge of the American president. Let the president stand up and say that he had no knowledge of this flight, and then back up his statement by firing Allen Dulles, Dick Bissell, and those other 4 men who had pressed so hard for this flight. This was the challenge, and that was the price. There was still a chance that Ike could have his long-dreamed-of summit conference, but now he would have to pay the price. Thus Eisenhower was put to the biggest test of his entire career. Could he clean house? Could he rid the country of those who, as Harry Truman said, had diverted the CIA to become the center of foreign intrigue, or would he have to bend to their might and their cunning to see his dreams shattered in a Cold War and cruel awakening? Many years later, it was President Richard M. Nixon who said, when you inherit a nightmare, and that was as far as he went with his thought. President Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs, had the same nightmare. President Eisenhower had come within 2 weeks of achieving not only the goal of an aging president who had given his entire adult life to his country, but of realizing the hope of the entire country for a lasting and hopeful peace. No one will ever know just why he turned down Khrushchev's gambit. No one will ever know why he decided to back the secret team at a time when it had permitted his plans to be shattered. Did he simply believe that his course was the only honest way out, and that someone in his administration had made an innocent mistake? Or did he succumb to a greater pressure? It was not only the U-2 that had trapped him. The secret team had armed and equipped a major force of tens of thousands of Tibetans high beyond the Himalayas. It had thousands of Cubans under arms and in training all over North America, all over the North American continent, from the Canal Zone to many sites in the United States. It was deeply entwined in the politics and economy and rebellions of Africa, and already the United States, which had seldom seen armies in its own streets, was becoming accustomed to the roars of heavy trucks, and the march of feet in embattled inner cities. Did Eisenhower really have a choice? Could he just fire Allen Dulles and a few of his top lieutenants and clean house that simply? He knew that he could not. Those other men who had seen to it that all the little things fell into place and that the U-2 had gone aloft on that precise day were men of the secret team, and wiping out Dulles and his staff would not touch them. Furthermore, it was one thing to have the power to see that the U-2 was not stopped from going on a rather routine flight, but it was an entirely different matter to be able to assure that it would come down in a very... But it was entirely different. But it was an entirely different matter to be able to assure that it would come down in the very center and heart of the Soviet Union. The men responsible for this flight were highly competent, and they knew, for instance, that if all the important hydrogen bottle was only partly filled, they could count upon the planes coming down as certainly as if they had only partly filled its tanks with fuel. But fueling was a routine chore done by men who always knew the plane must be full, and a pilot knows that he must check the tanks and the caps. Also, on the U-2, you can just about tell how full it is by seeing how much the heavily loaded wings droop and when the plane is on the ground. Hydrogen starvation was much more subtle. As Ike pondered his dilemma, it no doubt flashed through his mind how all of these pieces began to fit together. He had heard a little about the training of Cuban exiles. He had heard something of the Tibetan flights and of the training of Tibetans in the United States for deep paradrop missions in far northwest China. He knew of the troubles in Africa, and he knew how inner-city problems were welling up in the United States. But he had put all of this aside as a small matter in comparison to the importance of his great crusade for peace. It is quite evident that these thoughts preyed upon his mind. On March 9th, he authorized Secretary Herter to say, in accordance with the National Security Act of 1947, the President has put into effect since the beginning of his administration directives to gather by every possible means information required to protect the United States and the free world against surprise attacks and to enable them to make effective preparations for their defense. Under these directives, programs have been developed and put into operation which have included extensive aerial surveillance by unarmed civilian aircraft, normally of a peripheral character, but occasionally by penetration. To underscore what the Secretary had said and to confirm what had been on his mind, the President himself said, as the Secretary of State pointed out in his recent statement, ever since the beginning of my administration, I have issued directives to gather in every feasible way the information required to protect the United States and the free world against surprise attack and to enable them to make effective preparations for defense. He was putting together in his own mind all of the bits and pieces of the big puzzle. He had been trapped by his own secret team, and all of the things they had been doing now made a pattern. The United States and the world were not going to have peace. They were going to enter a generation, or perhaps even more, of numbing Cold War in which the inputs of random secret intelligence would provide evidence of subversion throughout all the countries of the free world, and the United States would react by attacking subversive insurgency wherever it was discovered. Now Eisenhower could see what his old comrade in arms, Maxwell Taylor, had meant by his new national military plan of flexible response. There is much more meaning in those words than anyone would suspect at first reading. It would have been enough for Maxwell Taylor to suggest a new national military plan, but this was not the idea. He meant that from now on the country would be mobilized in an increasing frenzy to the tune of another trumpet, which called for a military plan of flexible response to secret intelligence alarms and cries of subversive communist insurgency. All of these things took on a new meaning and a totally new warning. The president may have realized that he was not really in charge of events and that he could not honestly say that he did not know what was going on. Yet he had never seen the picture in its totality before. There was no other way out. President Eisenhower did the only thing he could. He announced to the world that he had known about the flight and that it had been his sole responsibility as Commander-in-Chief of the United States. With that, Khrushchev had no choice but to face the same facts his way. How could he hope to reach a peaceful settlement and meaningful agreements with a president who was admitting to the world that at the very time he had been speaking peace, he had been plotting overflights and the invasion of the territorial integrity of not only the Soviet Union, but of China and Tibet and Cuba? Khrushchev had no alternative either. All hope for a successful summit conference had gone. The leaders of the world attended the conference individually, but all was lost. With this great disaster, the 15-year search for a peaceful settlement in a world menaced by the atomic bomb came to an end. Vietnam lay ahead. That's it for Chapter 20. Bit of a short one. Chapter 21, another short one tomorrow. Time for a covert action. U2 to Kennedy inaugural tomorrow.